If you traced a line across the Atlantic Ocean in the year 1719, starting from the coast of West Africa, dragging your finger through the Gulf of Guinea, across open water to the Caribbean, down through the islands of Barbados and Martinique, up through the shipping lanes of Newfoundland, and then back again to the African coast, you'd be drawing the hunting ground of one man, a single pirate captain who, in just 3 years, captured more ships than Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, and Captain Kidd combined. Over 400 vessels taken. Tens of millions of dollars in stolen cargo by today's value. A fleet so feared that entire colonial trade routes were rerouted just to avoid him. His name was Bartholomew Roberts. And if you've never heard of him, that's exactly the problem. Because while Blackbeard gets the movies and the theme park rides, while Captain Kidd gets the treasure legends and the History Channel specials, the most successful pirate who ever lived has been almost completely forgotten. No blockbuster films, no famous buried treasure, no skull and crossbones logo on a bottle of rum. And the reason he's been erased from popular memory is, in some ways, more interesting than the piracy itself. To understand how Bartholomew Roberts became the most prolific pirate in recorded history, you have to go back to a place that has absolutely nothing to do with the Caribbean. A small village in southwest Wales called Casnewid Bach, known today as Little Newcastle. It sits about a mile from the coast of Pembrokeshire, surrounded by green hills and sheep farms. The kind of place where nothing happens. The kind of place you leave. Bartholomew Roberts was born there around 1682. His birth name was actually John Roberts, though he'd later adopt the name Bartholomew for reasons that have never been entirely clear. Some historians think it was to honor the famous buccaneer Bartholomew Sharp. Others think he simply preferred how it sounded. Either way, the man who would terrorize the Atlantic was born in a country cottage in Wales, and by the time he was 13 years old, he was already working on merchant ships. That's an important detail, because Roberts didn't grow up dreaming of piracy. He grew up in the merchant marine. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. He learned navigation. He learned seamanship. He studied charts, tides, wind patterns. By his mid-30s, he was serving as third mate on a slave-trading vessel called the Princess, working the route between London and the Gold Coast of West Africa. It was brutal, unglamorous work. The pay was terrible. The conditions were worse. But it was a legitimate career, and Roberts had spent 2 decades building it. Then, in June of 1719, everything changed. The Princess was anchored off the coast of modern-day Ghana, near a place called Anomabu, when a pirate ship appeared on the horizon. The vessel was captained by a Welshman named Howell Davis, and his crew overwhelmed the Princess without much of a fight. The merchant sailors were given a choice that pirates offered to almost everyone they captured: join us or be left behind. Most of the crew from the Princess refused. Roberts, surprisingly, did not. Now, there's a debate among historians about whether Roberts joined willingly or was forced. Roberts himself later claimed he was pressed into piracy against his will, and that's possible. Pirates frequently forced skilled sailors to serve, especially navigators, and Roberts was an experienced navigator. But there's another version of the story that suggests Roberts looked at his situation clearly. He was 37 years old. He'd spent 20 years at sea making almost no money, eating rancid food, sleeping in cramped quarters, and taking orders from men he didn't respect. The pirates were offering equal shares of the plunder, voting rights on major decisions, and a code of conduct that was, in many ways, more democratic than anything the Royal Navy offered. Roberts reportedly told a fellow sailor that since he'd dipped his hands in muddy water and had to be a pirate, it was better being a commander than a common man. That line tells you everything about who he was: practical, clear-eyed, and deeply ambitious. Within 6 weeks of joining Howell Davis's crew, Roberts got his chance. Davis was killed during an ambush on the island of Principe, off the coast of equatorial Africa. The crew needed a new captain, and they voted. Not for one of the senior pirates, not for one of Davis's trusted lieutenants. They voted for the new guy, the former merchant sailor who'd been aboard for barely a month and a half. Why? Because he was competent, he was sober, he could navigate, and he had a quality that pirates valued above almost everything else. He was decisive. Roberts took command immediately, and his first act as captain was revenge. He gathered the crew on deck and told them what they were going to do. They were going back to Principe, the same island where Davis had been ambushed, the same fort where Portuguese soldiers had invited Davis ashore under the pretense of a trade negotiation and then shot him dead. Roberts sailed back under cover of darkness, landed a shore party, and attacked the fort from 2 sides simultaneously. His men burned half the town, spiked the cannons in the fortress, looted every vessel in the harbor, and killed every soldier who didn't run fast enough to disappear into the jungle. The entire assault took less than a night. By morning, the settlement at Principe was smoldering, and Roberts's crew had their first taste of what serving under this particular captain was going to feel like. Decisive, brutal, organized, and deeply, personally vindictive when provoked. It set the pattern for everything that followed. From that moment forward, Roberts didn't slow down. Not once. Not for 3 years. He sailed south along the African coast, hunting Portuguese merchant ships that carried gold dust, ivory, trade cloth, and weapons back to Lisbon. He took a massive vessel called the Sagrada Familia, which was carrying cargo worth millions, and he renamed it the Royal Fortune. That name would become a kind of brand. Roberts renamed multiple ships the Royal Fortune over the course of his career. When one was damaged or outgrown, the next flagship inherited the name. It was a level of strategic branding that no other pirate of the era thought about. Then Roberts did something unexpected. Instead of staying in African waters where the pickings were good, he crossed the Atlantic, the entire Atlantic. With a crew that had just tasted serious wealth, he sailed west to Brazil. The reason was simple. The Portuguese treasure fleet assembled off the coast of Brazil every year, loading sugar, gold, tobacco, and diamonds onto massive galleons for the voyage back to Lisbon. It was one of the richest convoys in the world, and it was guarded by warships. Roberts didn't care. He found the fleet anchored in the Bay of All Saints near modern-day Salvador, counted 42 merchant ships and 2 70-gun warships, and sailed straight in. He couldn't fight the warships. He knew that. So instead, he pulled alongside one of the merchant captains and quietly informed him that if the captain didn't point out which ship in the convoy was carrying the most valuable cargo, Roberts would burn every vessel in the bay. The captain cooperated. Roberts sailed to the indicated ship, a massive Portuguese galleon called the Sagrada Familia, boarded it, and discovered it was loaded with sugar, tobacco, animal hides, and a chest containing 40,000 gold moidores, which were Portuguese coins, worth roughly $50 each. He also found a diamond-studded cross that had been commissioned by the King of Portugal himself as a gift for the church. Roberts took everything. Then he sailed away before the warships could react. The entire operation took less than a day. That raid alone would have made Roberts one of the most successful pirates in history. But he was just getting started. From Brazil, Roberts sailed north into the Caribbean, and this is where his reputation went from impressive to almost unbelievable. He hit Barbados first, slipping into the shipping lanes that funneled sugar, molasses, and rum toward Europe. Within weeks, he'd captured and looted merchant vessels with a speed and aggression that shocked colonial governors who had assumed the pirate threat was winding down. He moved to Martinique and found a fleet of French trading ships anchored in the harbor, fat and unprotected. He took them all. Then he sailed to Dominica, raided the anchorage, moved on to St. Kitts, stripped the merchant traffic there, and swung down toward Jamaica, picking off vessels along the way like a fox moving through an unguarded henhouse. Everywhere he went, he left burning hulls, terrified sailors, and colonial administrators writing frantic letters to London begging for help. The response from colonial authorities was exactly what you'd expect. Angry and completely ineffective. The governor of Barbados assembled 2 armed warships and sent them after Roberts with orders to capture or destroy him. Roberts saw them coming, assessed their armament, sailed directly at them, captured one in a boarding action, and sank the other with cannon fire. He took the surviving crew prisoner, offered them the usual choice, join or be marooned, and added the captured warship to his growing fleet. The governor of Martinique, who apparently hadn't heard what happened to Barbados's warships, dispatched his own armed sloop to hunt Roberts down. Roberts captured that one too, but this time he was angry. He hanged several of the governor's men from the yardarm as a specific message, then sent the damaged ship limping back to port so the governor could see exactly what his navy looked like after meeting Bartholomew Roberts. He was so angry at Barbados and Martinique for sending ships after him that he designed a new personal flag. Most pirate flags of the era were variations on skulls and bones. Roberts created one that showed himself standing on 2 skulls, one labeled ABH for a Barbadian's head and the other labeled AMH for a Martinican's head. He flew this flag into battle for the rest of his career. That flag is actually one of the most important details about Roberts, because it reveals something about his personality that separates him from virtually every other pirate of the Golden Age. He took things personally. He wasn't raiding for survival or out of desperation. He was running a professional operation, and he expected a certain level of respect. When colonial governors treated him as a common criminal rather than as the commander of a fleet, he responded with calculated, theatrical violence designed to make a point. And he ran his fleet like a professional operation. This is where Roberts truly separates himself from every pirate you've ever heard of. Most pirate crews of this era were chaotic. Drunk sailors making decisions by committee, fighting over scraps, and dissolving into mutiny within months. Roberts looked at that model and decided it was stupid. He drafted a set of written articles, essentially a pirate constitution, that every man who joined his crew had to sign. These articles weren't suggestions, they were law. The articles covered everything. Every man had a vote in major decisions. Every man received an equal share of the plunder. The captain and the quartermaster received larger shares, but not obscenely larger. Weapons had to be kept clean and ready for action at all times. No gambling for money was allowed on board, because gambling led to fights, and fights led to dead sailors Roberts couldn't replace. Lights and candles had to be out by 8 o'clock at night. Any man who wanted to drink after 8 could do so, but only on the open deck. And here's the part that nobody expects. Roberts banned fighting on board the ship entirely. If 2 men had a dispute, they were required to settle it on shore by duel, supervised by the quartermaster. The logic was simple. A fight on a ship could damage the vessel, injure bystanders, or start a larger brawl. Roberts didn't allow it, period. The articles also included a disability compensation system. If a man lost a right arm in combat, he received 600 pieces of 8. A left arm was worth 500, a right leg, 500, a left leg, 400. Losing an eye or a finger had its own payout. This was, functionally, an insurance policy. Merchant sailors and naval sailors of the same era received nothing. If you lost a limb serving the Royal Navy, you were discharged and left to beg. Roberts's pirates had better workplace protections than the legitimate sailors they were robbing. The musicians on board were given Sundays off. That detail is usually mentioned as a quirky footnote, but it tells you something important about how Roberts ran his ship. He understood morale. He understood that men who felt respected and fairly treated would fight harder, sail better, and stay loyal longer. And they did. At his peak, Roberts commanded a fleet of 4 ships and a crew of over 500 men, which was larger than most colonial naval forces in the Caribbean. His personal discipline was another thing that set him apart. In an era when pirate captains were famous for being perpetually drunk, Roberts drank tea. Not rum, not wine, tea. He dressed in crimson silk and wore a diamond-studded cross around his neck, the one he'd stolen from the Portuguese king's shipment in Brazil. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds. Grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. He was described by contemporaries as tall, dark-complexioned, and commanding, with a presence that made men obey before he spoke. He also attended Sunday religious services aboard his ship, which tells you that Roberts was a deeply contradictory figure. He stole, killed, and terrorized the Atlantic for 3 years, but he considered himself a man of principle. He had rules, and he followed them, and he expected everyone around him to do the same. After devastating the Caribbean, Roberts didn't stay. He knew that the Royal Navy was concentrating forces against him, and he knew that the Caribbean was becoming too hot. So he did what almost no other pirate captain had the nerve or the navigational skill to do. He sailed north, way north, to Newfoundland. In June of 1720, Roberts sailed into the harbor of Trepassey, Newfoundland, with his black flag flying and drums beating on deck. Inside the harbor were 22 merchant ships and over 150 small fishing boats. The crews of those vessels took one look at the flag, recognized what it meant, and abandoned their ships. Every single one of them. Men literally jumped into longboats and rowed for shore. Some didn't even bother with boats. They just swam. Roberts sailed through the harbor without firing a single cannon, boarded every vessel he wanted, stripped them of supplies, cordage, weapons, sails, and anything else of value, then burned or sank the ships he didn't need. He conscripted experienced sailors into his crew, loaded his hold with salted cod and fresh provisions, and moved up the coast to the Grand Banks. On the Grand Banks, he intercepted the French and English fishing fleets that worked those waters every summer. He captured at least 10 more ships in a matter of days, taking a particular liking to a large French brigantine that he armed with guns, renamed, and added to his squadron. The fishermen couldn't fight back. They had no weapons, no training, and no naval support within 1,000 miles. Roberts moved through them like a scythe. When word of the Trepassey raid reached London weeks later, it caused a genuine political crisis. The Newfoundland fishing fleet wasn't a luxury. It was an economic engine. Thousands of British subjects were employed in the cod trade, and the dried fish they produced fed a significant portion of the empire's population, particularly in Catholic Europe, where demand for fish was enormous. Roberts hadn't just stolen cargo, he'd shut down an entire industry for the season. Parliament held emergency debates about the pirate threat. The Admiralty dispatched warships to Newfoundland. Merchants petitioned the Crown for protection. And Roberts, who was almost certainly 1,000 miles south by the time any warship arrived, kept taking ships as if nothing had happened. Over the next year, Roberts crisscrossed the Atlantic like no pirate before or since. He sailed from Newfoundland back to the Caribbean, took more ships around Suriname and the coast of South America, then crossed back to West Africa. He moved between continents the way other pirates moved between islands. His navigation was precise. His timing was impeccable. He knew the trade routes, the seasonal wind patterns, and the schedules of the treasure convoys, and he used that knowledge to position himself exactly where the richest targets would be. By late 1721, Roberts was operating off the coast of West Africa again, near the same waters where he'd been captured and pressed into piracy just 2 years earlier. He'd taken over 400 ships. His crew was enormous. His reputation was so terrifying that merchant captains reportedly surrendered at the first sight of his flag, preferring to hand over their cargo peacefully rather than risk his anger. And that's when the Royal Navy finally caught up with him. The man who ended Bartholomew Roberts' career was Captain Challoner Ogle of HMS Swallow, a 50-gun warship that had been specifically dispatched to hunt Roberts down. Ogle was a patient, methodical commander, and he spent weeks gathering intelligence on Roberts' movements along the African coast. In early February of 1722, Ogle located Roberts' fleet near Cape Lopez, in what is now Gabon. Roberts had 3 ships at the time: his flagship, the Royal Fortune, a 32-gun vessel; the Great Ranger, under the command of one of his senior captains; and a smaller prize ship they'd recently taken. Ogle's strategy was simple but brilliant. He approached the fleet and allowed the Great Ranger to give chase, drawing it away from the rest of the fleet. Then he turned, overwhelmed the Ranger in a short, brutal fight, and captured the entire crew. With the Ranger out of the picture, Ogle doubled back for the royal fortune. He arrived on the morning of the 10th of February 1722. The weather was hazy and the wind was working against the Swallow, so Ogle had to tack carefully to close the distance. Roberts was eating breakfast in his cabin when his lookout called down that a ship was approaching. Roberts came on deck, studied the vessel through his glass, and initially thought it might be a French merchant ship, a potential prize rather than a threat. When the Swallow got close enough for Roberts to recognize it as a Royal Navy warship, he made a decision that tells you everything about the man. He didn't run. He went below, dressed for battle, and came back on deck looking like something out of a painting. The crimson silk damask waistcoat, the diamond cross on its heavy gold chain glinting against the red fabric, a feathered hat, 2 pairs of pistols slung across his chest on a silk sling, loaded and primed. His crew said later that he looked magnificent. He looked like a man who intended to either win or die looking good. Roberts ordered his crew to bear down on the Swallow, intending to pass close enough to deliver a crippling broadside and then run before Ogle could recover. It was a bold play, and it might have worked against a less experienced captain, but Ogle held his fire until the Royal Fortune was at point-blank range, then unleashed a devastating broadside of grape shot, the kind of ammunition designed to tear through rigging and kill men standing on deck. In that first exchange, Bartholomew Roberts was struck directly in the throat by grape shot. He died almost instantly, collapsing forward over one of his own cannons with his arms dangling and his blood running across the deck planks. He was 39 years old. His crew, honoring a standing order Roberts had given long before, threw his body overboard before the Royal Navy could take it. He'd told them years earlier that if he was killed, he wanted to be given to the sea, not displayed in chains at some colonial port as a warning. They wrapped him in his crimson coat, weighted him down, and dropped him into the Atlantic. His body was never recovered. Without their captain, the crew of the Royal Fortune fell apart. Some fought on, but most were too drunk to operate the cannons effectively. It turned out that Roberts had been the discipline. Roberts had been the strategy. Roberts had been the thing that held 500 men together across 2 years and 40,000 miles of ocean. Without him, they were just sailors with guns. Ogle captured 169 pirates from Roberts's fleet. Of those, 77 were of African descent, many of them formerly enslaved men who had been freed when Roberts captured slave ships. These men had joined Roberts's crew voluntarily, choosing the uncertain freedom of piracy over the certain horror of plantation slavery. Their fate after capture was, in many cases, worse than the white pirates. While the Europeans faced trial and the possibility of acquittal, many of the African crew members were simply re-enslaved and sold. The trial itself was held at Cape Coast Castle, a massive slave-trading fortress on the coast of present-day Ghana. The irony of that location is almost unbearable. Pirates who had freed enslaved people were tried and sentenced inside a building specifically designed for holding enslaved people before they were shipped across the Atlantic. 52 of the captured pirates were hanged. 20 were sentenced to hard labor in the Royal African Company's gold mines, which was effectively a death sentence served slowly. The rest were either acquitted on the grounds that they'd been forced into piracy, sentenced to shorter terms of servitude, or, in the case of many of the African crew members, simply absorbed back into the slave economy as property. It was the largest pirate trial in history, and it effectively ended the Golden Age of Piracy, not because Roberts was the last pirate. There were others. But because his death and the mass trial that followed proved something that had been in question for a decade. The Royal Navy could find you, the Royal Navy could catch you, and the Royal Navy would hang you in front of your crewmates to make sure the message carried. After Roberts, the era of pirates operating massive fleets across open oceans was finished. So why doesn't anyone remember him? It's a question worth sitting with, because the answer reveals something about how history actually works. It's not a record of what happened. It's a record of what makes a good story. Blackbeard had the look, the burning fuses in his beard, the terrifying appearance. He cultivated a mythology around himself that was designed for exactly one purpose: intimidation. And it worked. Not just on his enemies. It worked on history itself. Blackbeard looked like what people imagine when they think of a pirate. So he became the pirate everyone remembers. Captain Kidd had the mystery. The buried treasure that was never found, the trial in London, the political scandal. His story had narrative hooks that writers and filmmakers could build on for centuries. Henry Morgan had the transformation, pirate to governor, criminal to knight. His story had the kind of dramatic irony that makes for great drama. Roberts had none of that. He was competent, he was disciplined, he was devastatingly effective, but he didn't have a gimmick. He didn't bury treasure. He didn't put burning fuses in his hair. He didn't get pardoned and knighted. He just sailed and took ships and sailed some more and took more ships until a cannonball hit him in the throat on a Tuesday morning off the coast of Africa. Competence, it turns out, is not very cinematic. The most successful pirate in history was also the most professional, and professionalism makes for terrible movies. Nobody wants to watch a pirate captain who goes to bed at a reasonable hour, drinks tea instead of rum, and runs his ship like a well-managed corporation. That's not adventure. That's middle management. But there's another reason Roberts was forgotten, and this one is more uncomfortable. Roberts operated primarily off the coast of West Africa. His career was intertwined with the transatlantic slave trade. He captured slave ships. He freed enslaved people. He also, at times, participated in the trade himself when it suited his purposes. The waters he sailed, the ports he raided, the economies he disrupted were all built on the buying and selling of human beings. That context makes his story complicated in a way that the Caribbean swashbuckling stories of other pirates are not. For centuries, Western storytelling about pirates has focused almost exclusively on the Caribbean. The blue water, the white sand, the palm trees. It's a romanticized setting that allows piracy to be turned into entertainment without too much moral discomfort. Africa doesn't offer that same escape. The African coast in the early 1700s was a place of slave forts, forced labor, and unimaginable cruelty, perpetrated not by pirates, but by the supposedly legitimate governments and trading companies of Europe. Roberts operated in that world, and telling his story honestly means telling that story too. It's easier to just talk about Blackbeard, but here's what's worth remembering about Bartholomew Roberts. Beyond the 400 ships and the Diamond Cross and the tea, he built something. In an era when piracy was defined by chaos, drunkenness, and short, brutal careers that usually ended at the gallows, Roberts created a functioning society on the water. He wrote laws. He established compensation for injuries. He gave every man a vote. He prohibited fighting and gambling and imposed quiet hours. He ran his ships with more fairness and more structure than the Royal Navy, the Merchant Marine, or any colonial government of his time. That doesn't make him a hero. He was a thief and a killer who terrorized thousands of people across 2 continents and an ocean. But it does make him something more interesting than the cartoon version of piracy that popular culture has been selling for 300 years. The most successful pirate in history wasn't a wild man with a burning beard or a treasure-burying madman. He was a Welsh sailor who got tired of being poor, joined a pirate crew at 37, and spent the last 3 years of his life proving that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't rage or madness. It's competence with nothing left to lose. His body is somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, off the coast of Gabon, still wrapped in that crimson silk coat, weighed down and sinking through black water into whatever darkness waits below the continental shelf. The Diamond Cross is gone, probably melted down or pried apart and sold stone by stone centuries ago. The fleet is gone. The articles he wrote are preserved only in fragments quoted by the man who wrote the first major history of piracy a decade after Roberts died. The 400 ships are footnotes in maritime history books that sit unread on university shelves. But for 3 years, from 1719 to 1722, Bartholomew Roberts owned the Atlantic Ocean. Every merchant captain who sailed between Africa, Brazil, the Caribbean, and Newfoundland knew his name and feared his flag. Every colonial governor from Barbados to Massachusetts wrote letters about him. Every warship in the Royal Navy had standing orders to find him. And then the grape shot found his throat on a hazy morning off the coast of Africa, and the sea took him the way he asked it to, and the world decided to remember Blackbeard instead.